The movie begins with a girl named Tessa lying unconscious in the middle of the road because she has just had an accident. From the accident, Tessa can't see herself in a coma. As a result of the accident, she had to undergo a liver transplant. Tessa is seen lying on a hospital bed after undergoing surgery. The movie background moves to 182 days before she had the accident. One morning, Tessa seemed to be preparing herself in her room on the second floor. She then took the camera from the table and went down to the first floor. Her mother offers her breakfast, but she refuses because she doesn't want to eat. She then rushes out of the house. It appears that Tessa's father is behind them, observing their interaction. Tessa's father and mother then discussed her behavior. Even though it has been a year since she was adopted, she still doesn't consider them her parents. Tessa then went to a forest where she took many pictures with her camera. This activity is carried out by her as a school holiday assignment. She then continued her journey towards the beach not far from the forest. Her camera then shoots a person walking alone on the beach. After it was enough to take pictures that day, Tessa continued her activities by watching movies in a cinema. After buying tickets, she entered a studio. It was still too early, therefore, there was only her as the audience in the studio. The door opened shortly after, and a man entered. The man appears to be sitting next to Tessa. She realized that he was the man she had shot at the beach. At that time, Tessa watched a French-language film, but she found that there were no subtitles in the film. She then intends to protest to the cinema guard, but the man stops her and offers to become her translator. At first, she refuses his offer and decides to go home. However, the man named Skylar said that the film they were watching had a good storyline. Tessa then cancelled her intention to go home, and in the end, they watched the 3-hour romance film together. Tessa seemed so immersed in the film that she shed tears when she saw the film's ending. Without realizing it, her hand was already on Skylar's thigh. Tessa, who had just realized this, then apologized to Skylar out of embarrassment. He seems to understand her behavior too deeply in the film. Tessa thinks this is natural because the film is a film about love. She thinks that love stories always end sadly. Skylar disagrees with her words and thinks that love stories don't always end sadly. Tessa then gave an example of some films that ended sadly, one of which was Romeo and Juliet. She thinks that the end of a love relationship makes a love story so memorable. Skylar refutes her words by giving examples of romance films that end happily, like Pride and Prejudice. Tessa rejects Skylar's opinion and says it's just a story writer's wish and fantasy. Their argument stopped because the cinema guard reprimanded them both for leaving the room. When the two of them were outside the cinema, Skylar thanked Tessa for allowing him to translate the film for her. She also thanked him for being her translator. They then decided to separate. However, before they had gone far, they had just realized they had not yet become acquainted. Skylar then shouted his name, and so did Tessa. Moments later, Tessa realized that her jacket had been left in the cinema. And as she picked up the jacket from her cinema chair, she realized that Skylar's hat had been left there too. When she was about to return it to Skylar, it turned out that he was nowhere to be seen. The scene then back to the present. It looks like Tessa is still lying on the hospital bed. At that moment, Skylar was also seen lying next to her. He then invites her to go somewhere. He then carried her, and as they were about to leave, Tessa just realized what she was experiencing was just a dream. She wakes up, calling out Skylar's name. When Tessa calls Skylar's name, it turns out that a doctor is checking her condition. The doctor realized that Tessa had a bad dream and said it happened a lot in the hospital. He said it was part of the grieving process. Tessa then said that she could feel Skylar was really there. The doctor said that a writer named Doris would love to hear her story. Doris is a writer specializing in paranormal events. The doctor then gave some of Tessa's belongings from her accident. Apparently, the report on Tessa's accident has been closed because she doesn't remember any of the events that happened to her. Moments later, another doctor gave a report on Tessa's improving health. The doctor said that 90 out of 100 patients who experienced an event like her would die. Tessa was apparently lucky that she could be saved. The doctor then told her to be careful. If anything happened, she had to quickly call 911. The next day, Tessa is seen standing in the bathroom. She then looked at herself in the mirror and cried. She recalled her memories with Skylar. She then seemed to cut her long hair. Not long after, someone knocked on the bathroom door. Tessa asked the person knocking on her bathroom door to wait a moment, and when she came out, she found no one. Not long after, her cell phone vibrated, and she found a message from an unknown number. The message sent photos of their memories at the beach. Tessa then heard Skylar's voice saying that he would translate the film for her just as they first met. She immediately turned around, but no one was there. In the morning, Tessa decides to meet a writer named Doris. Doris was seen sitting in the hospital garden and then greeted her warmly. She then motioned for Tessa to sit down, and Tessa told her what happened. Hearing Tessa's story, Doris said that those who had died could communicate with humans. They will try to convey the message that they are still around us. This means Skylar leaves a message to Tessa that he is still around her. Doris then gives Tessa one of her books, but Tessa refuses. She then said that Skylar was trying to contact her and that she should call him back. But Tessa still refuses Doris's book and says it's too late. The scene switched back to 102 days before the accident. Tessa seemed to be looking at one of the photos she had taken during the school holidays. She then came to the front of the class to present the photo. One of the students in her class sneered at her work. Not long after, the school bell rang. Tessa's teacher walked up to her and said that her skills had improved and that this could lead to her being accepted into the Rhode Island School of Design, and the teacher was willing to give her a letter of recommendation. But Tessa said that her work was still not enough to be able to go to school there. Tessa's teacher then suggested she hone her skills again by taking pictures of the objects she likes. In the evening, Tessa continues her photo hunting activities. She went to the cinema where she and Skylar first met. Then she recalled the moment. The next day, Tessa then processed the photos in a dark room and displayed them on a wall. Tessa then met her best friend, who was waiting for her in front of the camera shop named Shannon, and they went to school together. While in front of the school, the two of them were approached by a man named Cortez, who was a member of the rowing club. Cortez asked Tessa and Shannon to help him retrieve the documentation for their rowing competition. At first, Tessa refused Cortez's request. However, Shannon apparently likes one of the men in the rowing club and forces Tessa to agree to Cortez's request. The next day, Tessa and Shannon sit on the jury ship to pick up the documentation. At first, Tessa didn't seem enthusiastic about the activity. But she realized that Skylar was one of the rowing contestants. She became excited and immediately turned her camera's focus on Skylar and his partner. After the match is over, Tessa then goes to Skylar to congratulate him and returns his hat that was left in the cinema. Skylar looks both happy and surprised by Tessa's arrival. Not long after, Skylar's mother came up to him. His mother immediately knew Tessa because Skylar had told his mother about herself. Skylar was embarrassed by his mother, but he asked Tessa for a date. The next day, Skylar comes to pick up Tessa at home. During the trip, they exchanged stories with each other. Skylar tells Tessa that his family life is not going well, but he tries to cover up the full story. They arrived at a restaurant by the lake. The restaurant has a view of a classic 60s building known as a honeymoon resort. Tessa told him that she had sneaked into the resort to take pictures. Hearing Tessa's story, Skylar became interested and wanted to take her to the resort. They walked to the resort through the grass. When they got there, they found that the resort was no longer functioning and had become an abandoned building. They both explored the place before they both went home. Skylar escorted Tessa back to her front door. Skylar said he would be in the city during his summer vacation before continuing his studies in another city. As they said goodbye, he kissed Tessa on the cheek and she walked into the house blushing. The scene goes back again to the present. Tessa seems to be sitting in her room, looking at the pictures pasted on the walls of her room. The picture shows some of her memories with Skylar. Not long after, her mother came into her room and said that Shannon had picked her up in front of the house. When Tessa got off, they hugged and then headed to Shannon's car for the ride. Tessa then recounts her experience where she gets a supposedly mysterious message from Skylar, which contains an image of their memories, and she tries to decipher the meaning. Shannon says it's normal that after a loved one leaves, they tend to constantly seek meaning and clues to every event that happens in their lives. Tessa suddenly burst into tears and lamented that she did not believe that Skylar was gone. Tessa then shared that she remembered all the details of her meeting with Skylar, but regretted the situation where she could not remember anything that happened during the accident. Moreover, she shared that she and Skylar were fighting before their accident. Shannon then reminded them that the two of them had had a wonderful time together and that Tessa didn't have to worry about the fight she was going through. At school, Tessa looked at one of the photos displayed in the school hallway. The photo shows Skylar at a rowing competition where she is the photographer. Her art teacher sees Tessa and expresses her condolences to her. Her art teacher then advised Tessa to be able to channel her grief through art. Tessa seemed to ignore her words and then left. Tessa then went to the beach where she first photographed Skylar. She sat on a large tree trunk and recalled her memories with him. Tessa then turned to a lake. There she again recalls her memories of being with Skylar on a boat. That night, Tessa seemed to sort out all the memorable photos with Skylar in her room and collect them into a box. After that, she threw the photos into the trash. Her father, knowing this, was angry because Skylar would not want that. Her father also did this so that Tessa would not forget her dream, which was to become a photographer. Tessa seemed to ignore her father's words and rushed to her room. That night, Tessa again saw Skylar in her dreams. The next day, Tessa spent time lying on her bed. Her worried mother then asked her to eat, but she was silent. Suddenly, Tessa heard the sound of camera shots in her print studio. She was sure that Skylar was trying to communicate with her. The following day, Tessa goes to the hospital looking for Doris. But by then, Doris had recovered and her family had brought her home. Suddenly, Tessa wobbled, and the doctor rushed to treat her. After the examination, the doctor then gave a safe deposit of the book that Doris gave to Tessa if she came looking for it. After returning from the hospital, Tessa studied books from Doris and saw many videos that she had uploaded on her YouTube channel. The scene was back in time, 65 days before the accident. That day Tessa, Skylar, Shannon and her boyfriend were seen on the beach. The sky at that time was not friendly because it was shrouded in dark clouds. Meanwhile, Skylar seems restless to hear the news of his mother and father's divorce. Tessa tried to comfort him. After returning from there, Tessa invites Skylar to stop by her house. She then invited him to enter her studio and gave him her best photo. Skylar then persuaded Tessa to dare to show her work because he judged that Tessa's work had a high selling value. However, Tessa rejects Skylar's idea because she doesn't want it yet. Their conversation continued down the street when taking Skylar home. Skylar then tells about his past, which makes it difficult for him to have big dreams. His biological father ran away while he was still in the womb, while his mother kept changing partners until he could not count the number of times his mother had a partner. His current adoptive father is one of his mother's ex-husbands. His past and present life made him always careful in his actions and always looked at things differently from others. The next day, Tessa seems to be preparing lunch in the morning because, apparently, she is going on a date with Skylar by the lake. Skylar had prepared a small boat for them, and they seemed to enjoy the day very much. The scene then goes back to the present. Tessa seems to be sitting in her school garden and waiting for Shannon. That day, they will take the SAT exam. Before entering the exam room, Tessa tells Doris's theory about the communication of two different realms between Skylar and herself. She then said that after anyone dies, there is a waiting room where every spirit wants to give messages that have not been conveyed to those still alive. Tessa sensed that Skylar was trying to contact her and speak to her one last time before they could actually say goodbye. However, Shannon didn't believe all these theories and asked her to focus on the exam. Tessa was surprised when the exam was in progress because the pencil moved by itself. Even when she tried to hold the pencil, she felt her hand move to scribble on her exam paper. Suddenly, all the cell phones in the room rang, and the teacher was forced to stop the exam. After that incident, Shannon looked at Tessa and believed what she said. The scene goes back to 11 days before the accident. Tessa and Skylar are seen at a photography exhibition by an artist named Julian. Moments later, Tessa becomes annoyed that Skylar is selling her handiwork that was given especially to him. Skylar says that he wants Tessa to grow, but she doesn't like his efforts. Tessa is angry with Skylar for doing this to her outside the room. Skylar again explained that his aim was to make her confident and able to continue her studies at RSID and get a scholarship. However, Tessa has doubts about the purpose of continuing her studies. Apart from the cost, she is also doubtful about her future. She then asks Skylar not to correct herself and all her disbelief. This makes him realize why she has never once expressed her love for him. A disappointed Skylar then chooses to go home, leaving Tessa. The next day, Tessa is seen working her part-time job at the cinema. Several times she ventured to send messages to Skylar and asked him to go out tonight, but he replied that he couldn't because he was going to see his father. That night at home, Tessa asked her mother to be her photo model. But to be honest, she wanted her mother to hear her outpourings. Her mother advised her to dare to express her feelings to Skylar. That night, Tessa apologized for her bad treatment to her adoptive mother. The scene goes back to the present. Tessa appears to be at Shannon's house. Shannon invites her to be able to do a communication ritual with the spirits, but none of them work. In the afternoon, Tessa said goodbye to Shannon because her mother would use the car she was currently using. When she gets home, Tessa senses that Skylar is giving her a clue. Suddenly, the car head unit screen shows a map of the city. Tessa then looked at her scribbled exam paper and realized that the scribbles on the exam paper were clues to a location. She then rushed to plug the car and headed for the location that had been given by Skylar. After traveling, suddenly, Tessa was at Doris's house. Apparently, Skylar asked Doris for directions to be able to communicate with Tessa. Doris tells Tessa that there is ancient folklore that the souls of the dead will return to where they experienced the moment of their greatest love, where they can cross the barriers of life and death. But Doris asks Tessa to be careful because if she crosses the barrier, she might not be able to find her way back. The scene switches back to 5 days before the accident. That day, Tessa and Skylar met at Shannon's birthday party. Tessa intends to express her feelings to Skylar, but that intention turned into great anger after she hears the news from a friend of Skylar's who alluded to Skylar's move to another country. Tessa was upset that she had signed up for the RSID as Skylar wanted so they could continue to be together, but it was him who would leave her. Skylar then gave the reason that he had to move to another country. He wanted to take care of his father who is currently sick after his divorce from his mother. He also assures that Tessa can visit every now and then. It didn't make her anger subside. Skylar mentions that Tessa doesn't understand his position because she doesn't have a family. This made her offended, and she decided to end their relationship. The scene goes back to the present. Tessa was waiting for Shannon in front of the movie theater, where she got to know Skylar for the first time. She borrows a sophisticated camera from Shannon's father, a full-spectrum camera with motion sensors and perfect night vision. This follows Doris's theory, which reveals that a camera with a full spectrum can capture the supernatural beyond human vision. After trying to shoot at cinemas, beaches and restaurants, Tessa saw no sign of Skylar's door. Meaning those 3 places weren't where Skylar experienced his greatest love. Their next destination was the old resort near the restaurant they had a date with. There, Skylar really showed himself at that time. But their meeting is blocked by the mirror that divides the 2 worlds. Skylar keeps hitting the mirror until it shatters, and Tessa falls unconscious. Moments later, a policeman picks up Tessa after finding out the location of her father for tracking her cell phone. When Tessa arrived in front of the house, she suddenly fell unconscious and was immediately rushed to the hospital. After receiving treatment, Tessa realized and heard that her condition was not well. She was required to undergo surgery after her condition was stable due to a blood clot in the area of the previous surgery. But Tessa doesn't want to be in the hospital because she doesn't have much time left for her final communication with Skylar. She rebelled and wanted to leave the hospital. Doctors immediately increased the dose of anesthetic to put her to sleep at night. Skylar then comes and whispers that nothing can stand in the way of their meeting. Instantly Tessa woke up because of the ringing of the cell phone's sound. It turned out that Shannon had called her to inquire about her condition. Tessa informs that she has managed to meet Skylar, but they can't talk to each other. And now she knew the last place to go was the lake because that's where Skylar said love for her. Shannon then decided to help Tessa out of the hospital and took her away to the lake. But when she arrived at the hospital, she was confused because getting out of the hospital was difficult without being seen. Instantly she realized that Skylar was helping them out. Miraculously the elevator doors opened by themselves, and the nurse couldn't hold them because they were locked from the outside. On the way, Skylar took the steering wheel. The scene switched back to the day of the accident. This is where the 2 times met, where Tessa saw the accident. At that time, they seemed to be saying love. Both of them admitted that they have no regrets about their togetherness so far, even though at this time they will be separated by distance and time, because once they have to go to another country. But not long after, a car was speeding toward them, and Tessa saw that Skylar had saved her from the accident. And finally, the 2 souls met. Because at that time, Tessa was in a coma or near death. A few days later, Tessa realized that she had to go back to living a life where she was not destined to die. The final phrase for Skylar is that his love will never stop for Tessa. He also advised her to give her a happy ending love story. In this case, he wanted her to continue living happily. Tessa also seems happy to go through her days after she finishes all her communication with Skylar. She already considers her father and adoptive mother as her parents. The moral that can be learned from this movie is to believe that love stories don't always have sad endings.